1 to 7, we have that all is one, the concept of duality, the Trinity, the law of 4 in cycles, the fifth element, 6 as the devil's number, and 7 as God's number. Do these numbers mean anything at all, past mathematically? Well, more than you think. More than just some meaning lost in the history of the holy books. What if I told you that the secret to how man conceived of God is in the numbers? Let's start at the beginning, as the universe does, moving in entropy. Number 1, oneness, that nothing is separate. It is a popular New Age idea and is derived from the meditations of Buddhism and Hindu beliefs, as is represented today. However, the concept of oneness has been thought of since shamanic times. It's impossible to know when it came from, but it seems humans have always had an inkling that all things are somehow connected. The idea is that all is one, and that no matter how you look at things, everything is connected. This is true, but not the most useful perspective. This is the perspective that the universe is one living, breathing consciousness, and we are all just small nodes of consciousness within a greater consciousness. In this perspective, separation is an illusion, and we are all just expressions of a connected supermind, which is the universe. Or we are connected to the source code of the computer program we exist within, whatever you fancy. We see this if we break down things into the ultimate similarity of all. This similarity is the good. Now, what I mean by this is that everything that comes to exist and doesn't die has a base in good. And I don't mean morally. Starting simply, a good rock is a rock whose atoms are bonded well. A good plant has strong cells. A good animal finds good plants growing in dirt and is able to maintain its homeostasis through eating them. It's internal balance. The good is simply harmony of form. On a greater scale, harmony of a society is in fact the moral aspect of good. For example, an unharmonious man will eventually be brought to the light, so to speak, and purged from society through prison, modern exile, or death. Essentially, nature, which we know now is just the material nature of God, the feminine aspect, will kill off that which is not rooted in goodness. So, to bring things full circle, good and God are words that sound very similar. And the reason for that is in the past, they were the same word. That which was good was godly, so to speak. So good is the adjective for God. Everything, even bad things, like death, hardship, or famine, are rooted in good because it maintains a standard of harmony. This harmony is the good that is rooted at the base of all things. This is the one thing that we all have in common at some level. However, it is expressed in different ways in different people and things. For example, an aggressive, warlike man is good for the military. An analytical, slow-thinking, soft man would be good in the lab. A talkative, fast-thinking man is good in business or politics. A deep thinker is good in the arts. Then on a higher level, all of these aspects of our society are good for society, if held within a good balance. And a balanced society allows for growth in mind and in body, which then creates a higher level of consciousness and strengthen the people to build even greater institutions. And with that, you have to do an even greater balancing act. And finally, a man who is good at harmony will be a great leader, harmonizing the disbalance around him. Okay, so this is the good. Without it, everything crumbles, and it is the oneness that connects us all. And the good is the focal point of the soul of God. This inevitably leads to duality, number 2, because the distance between -1 and +1 is 2. While opposites are technically all one, and light and darkness both have purposes beneath them that serve the good, they manifest as opposites in the way that they express themselves on the physical level. Too much light is blinding. Too much darkness is sightless. Only in balance do they create beauty, the sunrise and sunset. In balance, you will always see a representation of the good. Everything has its balancing point and pair of opposites. Nothing exists without its opposite. As consciousness grows, opposites become more and more opposite. And the more polarized something is, the longer the spectrum of two opposites, the farther those opposites are from the good, from God, or from balance. So evil is really just too much of one opposite, at least in this universe. And the greater the opposites, the more glorious the good is that they create imbalance. This concept of polarity or duality is represented well by the yin-yang, a part of one pole being innately within the other, so they are the same. This means that in a place of balance, like the earth, darkness leads to light, and the light leads to darkness. And all of duality is based on the positive and negative principles, the full and the empty, which is where we get the illusion that one is good and one is bad. For example, light is the full principle and darkness is empty. And it's funny that we usually think of the empty principle as bad. It goes to show that humans are probably a bit polarized to the full rather than empty. As you see, all is one, just expressed in seemingly opposite ways. This is technically still oneness, but helps to give a better perspective of the nature of the one. The one expresses temperature on a scale of hot to cold, but it is temperature that exists. Hot and cold are but names for the extremes. Next is the three. So after the one expands itself to have opposite sides of itself, a midpoint is created between them, but that's not the true meaning of three. You can understand that there are poles and the balance between them with just the concept of oneness and duality. The number 3 finds meaning in the difference between polarity and balance. So, the one versus duality. Literally 1 plus 2 equals 3 here. So this represents the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, as Christianity portrays it. Though this is much better explained as being the principle of gender, and in less poetic words. The Father is the balanced source. The Son is the balance between balance and disbalance. And the Holy Ghost represents nature, which is the God that you see flowing through everything. And what do we learn that nature is? The nature of God is our world of poles that comes from the Father, or the balanced source. It is the feminine aspect of the universe. Women are more polarized, closer to nature, internally disbalanced, which makes them more balanced externally, as we know. And men are closer to the Father, or the source balance internally. However, because man's consciousness is only a fraction of God's, his internal balance is usually not in balance with nature. So, woman keeps man balanced to nature, and man leads in the strength of his internal balance. Together that creates the Son. This is what that is. And the Son, or the balance between nature and God, is the seat of the soul and where we tend to be around as a species, and is the truth and the way to becoming more like God. And the interaction between genders keeps us around the Son, if all things are good. The Son, or balanced balance, is known as the seat of the soul, because it is like a smaller version of the source. This could be why we are called the children of God. Next, the law of 4, as we already know, includes the downgoing of the midpoint and the upgoing of the midpoint in a wave system. 3 is known as the masculine number because it represents movement towards balance and is the quest of a masculine soul. 4 is known as a feminine number because it is the number of nature, which is representation of God, and the quest of a feminine soul is to live in grace with nature. So 4 is based in polarity extremes as well as the rising and falling midpoints, and almost everything has 4 stages in a natural cycle, as we know. In this, 2 plus 2 equals 4, duality of extremes plus the duality of the midpoint. But 3 plus 1 equals 4 also works. Now before going forward, you might have noticed that when we move to an even number, the previous odd number splits. What I mean is the 1 becomes 2, it's really just the 1. 3 becomes 4. You see the new midpoint, the new 1 that has been added to the 2, the Son, the balance between balance and disbalance. This then splits and represents the rising and falling midpoint and the other 2 of duality, which is why 3 plus 1 equals 4 and 2 plus 2 equals 4, if you see what I mean. And before going on to more complexities, we see that 2 is within 1, 3 is within 2, and 4 is within 3. So duality is just an aspect of the 1. 3 is literally 1 verse 2, and that comparison makes the third. And 4 is the duality of the sun, rising and falling midpoint, plus the duality of 2, both contained within 3 and made from 1. So, in a sense, 1 tells you everything, but it lacks detail. 3 is a more detailed explanation of 1 and 2 working together, and 4 is a more detailed version of 2 and 3, and it leads to number 5. Number 5 is where we find number 1 again. You may have noticed that the odd numbers always include an aspect of oneness, where even numbers are on duality. So, the 5th number is that which drives the cycle of 4, or the pure midpoint. It is the midpoint that is not moving up or down. So it is 3 plus 2 equals 5. But 4 plus 1 equals 5 also works. For example, what is behind the 4 states of consciousness? Awareness. The one behind the 4, the all-seeing eye at the top of the pyramid, which connects all 4 states. On a simpler level, the vibration of energy leads the 4 states of matter. So energy is behind matter. It also fractals up to higher cycles made of other cycles, meaning there is something behind energy, and energy is in its own cycle, which is the cycle behind matter. But that is incredibly complex, so I'll skip that for now. Now 6 goes back to the duality aspect again, and is a very personal number. It actually represents all the numbers. This is the 4 aspects of a cycle, that which animates the cycle, and finally the nature, rhythm, or way of the cycle, which is again a reflection of that which is behind the cycle. So we see that the 5th principle, the 5th oneness, is that which is behind the cycle. And now it splits into the nature of that which is behind the cycle and the driving force of it. So we see a kind of nature versus God here. 3 plus 3 equals 6, 1 plus 5 equals 6, 4 plus 2 equals 6. You can see how these come together, and it's why they make sense mathematically. Now, 6 is best represented by these 6 directions. Forward, backwards, leftwards, and rightwards are the 4 points of a cycle. Upwards is the thing that drives the cycle, the source, and downwards is the nitty-gritty of how the cycle manifests after the driving force interacts with other forces to set the cycle into place. In simple terms, the nature of the cycle. The sun and earth would drive the 4 seasons, and the nature of the 4 seasons is manifest in an area's climate. 6 represents our world and how it plays out. However, there is a reason that 6 is known as the devil's number. It is incomplete and leaves out the aspect of oneness that makes it whole. 7 is known as God's number because it includes the last possible direction, inwards. The common aspect of the 6 is that there must be a reference point from which to see the 6 directions, or for time to pass through a cycle. The one that sees time through as the aspects unfold. How is this possible though? And does it make a difference if someone is simply watching? Do cycles not happen if there is no human to look at it? That obviously doesn't make sense. Trees do in fact fall in the forest when no one is around. However, without a central point for the orbiting of these cycles, time would collapse, and these cycles would be as one. Okay, so why would time collapse without a watcher? Seems like a massive mental jump. It's because time doesn't really exist, and it is interpreted simply to differentiate experiences. Outside of time, all collapses into one. Imagine a pool of infinity doing quite literally everything at once. If you introduce time, you can see how it does things separately, but outside of time, it would simply be a white light of infinite potential. All of those things that happened would be happening, but all at once. So how was time made then? By a consciousness separating events. And because a tree can fall in a forest when no one is around to hear it, the one, or the good, which lies behind everything, must be aware of itself. It lives, and while outside it there is no time, within it time manifests as it shifts its thoughts being the coding of our world. Under every rock and in the deepest recesses of every cave, it watches itself, driving one stage of life to the other as it must. And it must, because a cycle is a circle, leading back to its beginning, meaning that without time, nothing actually happened. And so it seems, God is not idle, just as you are not idle. You breathe, and so does God. And so, we are brought back to the one which represents all. Its driving force is the good, which is inside all things. And it's very well explained through the number 7, the 7th number really just being oneness again. It is inwards. It is that which is sustainable, or that which cycles and exists in harmony to other cycles, which would mean that it is the base of all cycles that fractal into infinity. It is the one, and it is within you. It is quite literally the all in and of itself. We are within it, and therefore it is within us. It grows like a spiral, becoming an even larger, more profound cycle as time goes, yet still incorporating all it was before, because it never changed, only becoming more of what it already is. Man is the same when he grows in harmony, becoming more of what he already was, infinite good. And yes, this means our destiny is infinite, so long as we do not fall into the darkness. And as things fractal, upwards and downwards, this means that the God of our universe must be growing in harmony with something as well. Who knows? And the closer we get to God, to that balance of things, the larger the cycles we can see, and the more of the universe and ourselves will be revealed. Our consciousness grows, but as it does, its vision into the darkness extends, seeing further from the center, seeing the opposite as more opposite and creating a greater chance for evil, but also a greater potential for good. We look outward to see inward, for only in the reflection of what is beyond can we see what is within, and only by growing what is within can we see more of what is without. And so the growth of consciousness goes, like an ever-growing ball of light, which we can call the soul that is inward, the oneness that unifies all things, the golden spiral, the all